You're joining us on the news that Pope Francis has sadly died. The question before us is, was Papa Francesco the one good pope? Because within the context of the Catholic Church, he no doubt moved the institution in a more liberal, progressive direction. And we will see a few instances of that we can talk about. Of course, the context for this being that the last one was a member of the Hitler Youth. But even given that, what we've seen over the last decade and a bit is a model in which kind of the Pope does act as a kind of conscience of the world. And what will be interesting going forward, because he has stood up to figures like Trump. He has spoken about genocide in Gaza. He has spoken about wealth inequality. He has at least been accepting of the existence of gay people. He then later on said some used some phrases which were somewhat homophobic, but it's been an interesting thing to kind of watch. The first question, as Yoda on Coke is saying in the chat, is, was it JD Vance? Because Pope Francis died very shortly after meeting JD Vance. This was a really kind of fun story in that JD Vance had gone to Rome and gone to the Vatican with hoping that he could meet the Pope in something that was kind of a mirror of when he went to Greenland and wanted to try and meet with people there and no one would meet with him, so he had to go to the US Army base instead. There was a really interesting interview with him where he was just like, yeah, I'm here, I hope I get to meet the Pope, fingers crossed, which really feels like, I don't know, in my head, if you're the Vice President of the United States, that's kind of a thing you can make happen. And I really respected the fact that Pope Francis was kind of trying to not meet with him. If you are watching from the UK, you will of course feel echoes here of Liz Truss meeting the Queen for her weekly audience with the Queen shortly before the Queen died. So, Liz Truss and JD Vance, the two of the horse people of the apocalypse. I mean, it's really, it must be really fascinating to be, because, JD Vance is a Catholic, I'm pretty sure. Okay, maybe this, I don't know, maybe this is a widespread experience within the Catholic Church, I don't know. But, it's really funny for him to be a committed Catholic who is hated by the Pope. I was piecing together this afternoon the first thing we have to do is discuss, does anyone have an interesting finding out the Pope is dead story? So I found out the Pope had died after my nephew had come up to visit today and we'd gone to do crazy golf. And in the crazy golf place, there's no phone signal. So I came out, quite a sunny day here, and then went into a quite dark room with lots of lights and sound effects, and came out of the tiki-themed crazy golf course back into the sunlight, at which point my wife was like, have you seen the Pope has died? And the kind of handbrake turn from weird environment of a kind of 360 themed crazy golf place where I don't know whether God exists in the crazy golf place, but it doesn't feel like it. To the topic of the Pope having died, just felt like a real mad 360. But I also need to share with you this incredible TikTok. Some of you will be aware of Anne Russell, particularly maybe Brits. She is a British TikTok creator who her whole thing, or most of her thing, is cleaning tips, where she gives you tips on how to clean things. If there's a thing that's difficult to clean, but also some of the stuff is like how to save money whilst doing stuff around the house. And she found out whilst recording the reply to a comment on one of her videos, and then uploaded the video anyway, and it's so much fun.
If you have a mattress which is expensive, bulky and difficult to clean, you need a mattress protector, which is cheap and easy to chuck in the washing machine. But yeah, that's the trick. If you're sponging it, which you do, don't. Pope Francis has died. Pope Francis has died. If you have a mattress...
I love this so much. Like the choice to just upload it anyway and just be, but the shock. I don't know what Anne Russell's relationship to the Catholic Church is. She seems quite gutted. And what I think what I need is a kind of, okay, I'm not very good at like categorizing dance music. Would it be sort of like dubstep? Like some music with a drop. Okay, that's what I need. And I need someone to remix this. So it could be like, so it goes like...
You have a mattress, which is expensive, bulky and difficult to clean. You need a mattress protector, which is cheap and easy to chuck in the washing machine. But yeah, that's the trick. If you're sponging it, which you don't... Pope Francis has died. Pope Francis has died. If you have a mattress,
like, I think
which is...
I wish I had any of the skills to be able to make that happen, you know? So, okay, what I thought we would do is we would review some of the nice things that Pope Francis did as the one good Pope. And my favourite thing, so I came across this in the medium of a meme a little while ago, but slightly before, like maybe a few months back. And it was something I was... sort of reflecting on when he got ill recently. This is Sapphic with a Sword has predicted where I'm going with this, and it is possibly, so it sort of sounds like the kind of thing that someone might say if they were like really drunk or high or whatever, as like a man that's so deep. But the fact he's the Pope, I think, makes it actually deep. And an interviewer asked him how he imagines hell, to which Pope Francis' response was, what I'm going to say is not a dogma of faith, and I think that's because I think he once implied hell didn't exist in an interview, and that was a big hoo-ha. But my own personal view, I like to think of hell as empty. I hope it is. Just a really nice... like concept that maybe hell exists as this big thing to keep us in line, but in actual fact no one ends up there, you know. Maybe we all die and get forgiven. It's nice, isn't it? It's just a nice idea. So I hope he's I hope that he has arrived in the afterlife and discovered that everyone is there. That'd be really nice. I mean, okay, we're getting technical about this in the chat. We're wondering where all the Nazis went. But it's just a nice idea, isn't it? It's just a really nice idea. I think Pope Francis' suggestion was almost that hell might serve the same purpose as the doomsday clock, where every so often... the scientists are like, it's getting pretty darn close to midnight now. You all better get back in line. And then obviously no one does anything to sort of make the climate crisis less bad or stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And so they have to go, well, now it's 1 minute to midnight, getting closer now. We've also seen Papa Francesco take a much more understanding approach to gay people. Not the kind of super progressive approach that many of us might take in our lives or might like to wish the world operated on, but one which at least leans towards a lot more acceptance within the context of a church which has historically been incredibly hostile towards anyone that doesn't live in a kind of monogamous heterosexual relationship. There we go. Just months after he became the head of the Catholic Church in 2013, Pope Francis condemned the new tyranny of unfettered capitalism and the idolatry of money. As long as the problems of the poor are not radically resolved by rejecting the absolute autonomy of markets and financial speculation and by attacking the structural causes of inequality, no solution will be found for the world's problems, or for that matter, to any problems. Which is pretty radical for a pope, particularly if you look at the ways in which previous popes kind of very much lent into a anti-communism and very much kind of worked with a US that was engaging in practices of anti-communism, both in proxy wars, in build-up of nuclear weapons, in intervening in countries around the world, kind of overthrowing governments. Previous popes very much kind of supported that, Pope John Paul II in particular. And so to have taken a approach which did so concretely and unashamedly question some of those larger questions is quite a big deal. Yeah, I think, Miss Higher saying, after several of these nice moments from Pope Francis, to what extent did the doctrine of the church change? And I think that is a really big aspect of all of this, right? It's one thing to say, oh, I think that maybe we shouldn't judge gay people. It's another to say they are welcome within Catholic worshipping communities. It's one thing to say, actually, society should celebrate gay people and not persecute them. And yet the choice of who follows is going to be really interesting. Much like the Queen, we were talking about the Queen earlier, regardless of the specific role that the Catholic Church plays today, like the Pope is a big figure in global politics in terms of being even in terms of just being a spokesperson and a presence. Who holds that role does hold significant sway in terms of setting some of the kind of guide rails for global politics. Esri saying, I feel like Charles has been anything but interesting, which is quite a surprise. Like, Charles, as Prince Charles, was always very kind of trying to shift, kind of writing to ministers and all sorts, getting involved in politics. It does seem as though Francis might have managed to stack the deck to ensure that whoever follows him has a similarly kind of liberal, progressive take on things and is able to kind of continue some of that shift. Because not only does the voice of the Pope kind of carry weight, I think about 17% of the world still are Catholics. Currently 17.67% of the world is Catholic, that's quite a large chunk of the world, 1.375. And therefore that's also quite a large job in that, right? In terms of being leader of that flock. What's also interesting is that this is going to happen. I mean, this is likely to happen slightly before the Church of England here in the UK gets its new leader, because in the Archbishop of Canterbury. So a little while ago, the Archbishop of Canterbury, or former Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, stepped down after it turned out that, guess what scandal happened? He was at least not investigating. So Mr. Welby resigned over the church's handling of the sadistic abuser John Smith, who a recently published report said perpetrated brutal sexual, physical and mental abuse against more than 120 boys and young men since the late 1970s. The report said Mr. Welby had personal and moral responsibility and that he could and should have done more in the case. Yeah, as Kitchen's saying in the chat, he was aware of but not particularly active in stopping child abuse, I think is the way to kind of phrase that. So I was not trying to like provide apology. I was trying to make sure that I kind of said the thing that had happened and not a bad extrapolation of it. And so in the UK, there is an ongoing process of kind of selecting the next Archbishop of Canterbury. And this is, so I sort of grew up in the Church of England, so this is kind of a bit of that world that I know slightly better. And also I think kind of, I don't know, feel a kind of some sort of connection to, I guess. And what's interesting is that, you know, if someone was to kind of like ask you off the cuff, you would probably assume that the Protestant Church of England is a bit more liberal or a bit more to the left of the Catholic Church. And, you know, there are areas where that is very much the case, right? There are women priests in the Church of England. There is now, if you are a gay couple, you can have like a sort of blessing of your relationship. You can't get married, but the sort of like, this is kind of crucial in many ways. There's this kind of awkward compromise where you can't get married, but you can have a kind of like cool, a kind of half-hearted thumbs up. And yet, the papacy, is the word I'm looking for, looks like it's, with a bit of luck, gonna continue in a more progressive direction, where the archbishopric, is that the phrase, of Canterbury, is in a much more politically divisive place at the moment. The Justin Welby's kind of resided over a bit of friction within the Church of England, particularly around this topic of whether gay people should be able to get married in Church of England churches. It is the state church in the UK. However, it had like a specific carve out within the Equal Marriage Act, which said that Church of England churches don't have to. The Church of England can kind of decide itself on who can get married. What's happened is, although there's been like a compromise on that in terms of not pushing forward in terms of like full marriage and actually just going, you know, we can do these kind of like sort of slightly half-hearted prayers, the kind of right-wing conservative factions of the Church of England have like massively kicked off about that, and there is it's not entirely impossible that the Church of England could split. Like, that is very much a thing that could happen. And so the selection of the next Archbishop of Canterbury is actually going to be quite interesting, because, you know, in reality, for the Church of England to retain its role as an established church, which, I mean, I don't think should exist at all, but even if it wants to have a semblance of an argument that it should exist as that, it should kind of follow with the times in some regard, right? But if it wants to avoid a schism, as someone was just saying in the chat, then it effectively needs to, the easiest path would be to elect a conservative archbishop who would continue down the line of who would not continue down the line of progressive shifts. I mean, in the chat, Protestants try not to start a new church challenge, impossible mode. I think the difference here would be that, this is like the established church in the UK, that kind of, and however much that actually means in the day-to-day life, it's like kind of one of those weird cultural things that, like, a lot of primary schools in the UK are Church of England primary schools. But interestingly, like, a lot of this within the Church of England here in the UK has been the result of a kind of Americanization. So there's been a kind of growth of American style, like, evangelical churches, like rock bands, and possibly the vicar just wears whatever, and like, let's get loads of young people in because it's cool. There's been like a real rise of that in a way that is, I don't know, there's almost like a bait and switch almost, where I think they get a lot of young people in because it like sounds really youthful and cool, but also is at the very least not gay affirming, I think would be probably the thing to say. At the very least, it's like, we don't talk about this, and a lot of the time it's we're actively homophobic. And then, okay, actually, someone mentioning in the chat, there's also the additional aspect to all of the kind of picking of the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is that the Archbishop of Canterbury is also the kind of head of the global Anglican Church, and a lot of and that includes like a lot of churches in Africa that are a lot more conservative, a lot of churches elsewhere which are not even as progressive as the Church of England. So it's really interesting that at the moment there are two heads of the kind of head of the Anglican Church and the head of the Catholic Church, both up for election or selection on the Archbishop of Canterbury, and kind of going in different directions. But I don't know, I find myself, I don't know, I still find it kind of really intriguing. Someone earlier was doing a bit, okay, so 15 Watermelon said Welby, this Justin Welby, the outgoing Archbishop of Canterbury, was also a very low church or evangelical bishop, which was much more traditionally conservative in terms of faith, but not in terms of practice, which was very new. There's a big thing with the church musicians being defunded through his and his appointees' reforms. There's, like, which I don't know, so I grew up going to a church which was like reasonably kind of low. So if anyone doesn't know, when people talk about kind of low church and high church, within, I guess, but at least within the Church of England, like, high church would be very Catholic, like, so there might be, the priest might sing for a bit, someone might swing the holy handbag, my wife's family calls it, but like the thing with the incense in it that smell like it might be like very formal in that sense. A low church is like it's all a bit more chill, I guess, is the kind of thing. You might there might be guitars, like not even necessarily that, but like it might just be like a little bit more informal, I guess. And traditionally, if you were more high church in how you did things as a church, so if it looked all a bit more Catholic, a bit more popery, then you would probably also be more conservative in your kind of theology and how you viewed the world. Whereas if there was less popery, then sorry, I'm thinking about there's a film about Oliver Cromwell, and he jumps up partway through. He's a Puritan, of course, and he's in the church, and he jumps up, and there's like gold crosses on the altar, and he's like, "What is all this popery?" But if there's less of that, like traditionally, you would be more kind of liberal, democratic, maybe, that kind of thing. But what's kind of grown within the Church of England is this kind of like more American evangelical thing, where maybe you're a bit more, where maybe a church is much more casual in the form of it, and yet is also quite conservative in its theology, right? So they might not have hymns, but they have like kind of pop songs about Jesus instead, and yet in terms of both sort of theology and also kind of like just politics, are quite conservative.